In the quiet heart of Greenwood Park, a police K-9 refused to move, circling one woman over and over, his instincts unshakable. What looked like an ordinary handbag revealed something no one expected: sealed vials, hidden carefully, and a stranger watching from the shadows. But the real question is, was the woman carrying it by choice, or was she only a piece in something far larger? Because what investigators uncovered next wasn't just shocking, it changed everything. Here's the full story. But before we continue, drop your favorite moment with a dog in the comments and hit that subscribe button. The late autumn afternoon carried a stillness that felt heavier than the crisp air itself. Leaves scattered across the pathways of Greenwood Park, their edges curling brown against the damp concrete. Families lingered near the playground, joggers traced their usual laps, and the fountain in the park center gurgled quietly as if nothing unusual stirred beneath its surface. But Rex, the department's most trusted K-9, thought otherwise. Officer Grant had walked the same loop many times with Rex, their patrols through Greenwood often feeling more like routine than duty. The park, despite being nestled in the heart of the city, rarely produced more than minor disturbances. Yet Rex's sudden shift in behavior made the ordinary feel instantly precarious. The dog's muscles tensed, ears tilting forward, nose flaring at a scent invisible to human senses. His tail rose stiff, the unmistakable sign that his instincts had latched onto something or someone. Grant followed the line of Rex's gaze. Near the far bench, tucked away in the shadow of bare trees, sat an elderly woman. Her posture was rigid, her thin frame cloaked in an oversized wool coat that seemed too heavy for the mild chill in the air. A patterned scarf hid most of her face, but her pale hands clutched tightly at a handbag resting in her lap. She wasn't watching the children play, nor admiring the fountain. Instead, her eyes stayed fixed on nothing in particular. As though waiting, Rex pulled harder at the leash, not barking yet, but circling with a strange urgency. He wasn't aggressive without cause. His movements carried precision, trained habit mixing with instinct. Grant felt his chest tighten. To onlookers, she appeared as nothing more than an elderly woman sitting alone. But Rex's sharp focus told a different story. Something about her presence carried a weight unseen by human eyes. At first, Grant considered it might have been a faint drug trace or residue of something innocuous. Yet the longer Rex circled, the clearer it became. This was no fleeting alert. He pawed at the ground near her feet, inhaling deep and quick, then looping again, tracing a circle tighter and tighter around her. The woman barely reacted, though her grip on the handbag grew more rigid, knuckles paling against the fabric. Grant's radio crackled as he called for support. Within minutes, additional officers began to arrive, drawing subtle boundaries around the park's eastern wing. Parents started pulling their children closer, eyes darting curiously toward the strange scene. An old woman on a bench, a K-9 refusing to leave her side. The tension spread outward like ripples across the fountain's surface. Rex sat back briefly, issuing one sharp bark that echoed through the park. He didn't lunge, he didn't waver. He simply barked once, then locked his eyes back onto the handbag. That single bark was all it took. Grant recognized it as Rex's signal, a clear, decisive confirmation. The dog was no longer searching, he had found. But what had he found? When the woman finally lifted her gaze, her eyes scanned the line of officers forming around her. They were calm, almost unnervingly so, but something flickered behind them. It wasn't fear, not the trembling panic of someone caught doing wrong, but something quieter, heavier. An officer retrieved her identification. The name checked out as local, but her record was clean. No warrants, no priors, nothing that should have put her on any radar. Yet Rex had locked onto her like she carried the weight of something deeply wrong. The first connection appeared in the most subtle way. A man who had been jogging earlier suddenly stopped near the fountain, watching the commotion too intently. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes weren't on the woman. They were darting between Rex and the handbag. After a moment, he turned abruptly and left the park, slipping through the south exit. Grant noted it. too deliberate to be casual. Meanwhile, Rex's handler crouched beside him, noticing how the dog's nose lingered not just on the outside of the bag, but on a specific seam near the base. It was faint but visible. The stitching had been reinforced, newer than the rest of the worn leather. Why would an elderly woman carry a bag with hidden reinforcement? The crowd's curiosity thickened. Parents whispered. Teenagers filmed with phones. Yet in the middle of the noise, Rex stayed fixed in his circle, energy sharp as a blade. Another detail surfaced when an officer checked nearby security feeds from the park's perimeter. Footage showed the woman entering 2 hours earlier, not through the main gate where cameras were obvious, but through a side service road used mostly by maintenance crews. She had no shopping bags, no companion, only the handbag clutched tightly to her chest. Why avoid the main entrance? By the time the decision was made to inspect the handbag, the atmosphere was heavy enough to choke on. A containment protocol was prepared, gloves and scanners ready. Officers moved slowly, careful not to provoke sudden movement. When the bag was finally unzipped under controlled conditions, its contents emerged piece by piece. The first items were mundane: loose coins, tissues, a wallet with family photographs, normal things any elderly woman might carry. The tension dipped slightly, some bystanders whispering about overreaction, but Rex didn't move. His focus sharpened even more, as though waiting for the one thing hidden deeper. And then it appeared. Inside the reinforced seam was a secondary compartment, one that had been sewn into the lining with deliberate care. It wasn't accessible without close inspection. From it, officers retrieved a small metallic container about the size of a glasses case. No labels, no markings. Its weight was heavier than its size suggested. Grant exchanged a look with Rowan, who had just arrived. Rowan was silent, but his jaw tightened. The container was set aside for later examination, sealed immediately in an evidence box. Yet the reaction wasn't relief, it was unease. Because the woman hadn't looked surprised, her expression, though calm, shifted almost imperceptibly when the container was revealed. Not shock, not fear, but resignation, as though she had been waiting for this moment. Why carry a container like that? Why hide it so carefully? Why sit quietly in the park with it in plain view, as if waiting for someone or something? And most unsettling of all, why had Rex's alert been so unshakable? The officers knew the answers would come in pieces, but even now, connections were beginning to form. The jogger who had slipped away, the unusual entry through the service road, the bag's reinforced seam, the metallic container. Each detail by itself could be explained, but together they formed a chain too deliberate to ignore. As the woman was escorted toward the waiting patrol car, Rex's gaze never left her. His posture was taut, every movement signaling that the discovery wasn't finished, that something larger still lingered beyond what they had found. And when Rowan's phone buzzed with an urgent message, the pieces pulled tighter. The metallic container had been scanned en route to the lab. Its readings came back inconclusive, not drugs, not explosives, not any common compound. Instead, it contained traces of something categorized only as biological unidentified. Grant's chest sank. Biological. Whatever was inside wasn't just contraband. It was something far more dangerous. And if Rex had alerted so strongly, it meant the presence wasn't just within the container, it was strong enough to trace. Which begged the question, had the woman been carrying just one, or were there others nearby? As the patrol car pulled away, Rex lifted his head toward the northern edge of the park. His nose twitched, muscles tightening again. Grant followed his gaze. The park looked ordinary. Families, laughter, footsteps over fallen leaves. But Rex's instincts never lied. And the realization settled like stone in Grant's chest. What they had found in her possession was only the beginning. The metallic container sat under glaring white lab lights, its surface sterile and cold, but its implications anything but. Officers clustered outside the observation window, their faces tense as the evidence techs began the slow, meticulous process of analyzing its contents. Inside, rows of tiny vials glimmered under magnification, cloudy, Viscous liquid filled each one, the texture faintly uneven as if alive with something unseen. Each vial bore only a number, neatly scrawled by hand. It wasn't the kind of material that stumbled into an old woman's handbag by mistake. While the lab worked, Officer Grant and Detective Rowan focused on the pieces left hanging in Greenwood Park. The jogger who slipped away, the wiped surveillance near the service road, and most pressing of all, Rex's unrelenting fixation even after the woman was taken away. Dogs didn't cling to false trails. If Rex hadn't eased, it meant there was more. At headquarters, the elderly woman sat quietly in an interview room. Her coat draped across the chair, scarf still neatly folded. She gave no outward signs of distress. She answered questions softly, politely, but every response circled back to vagueness. She claimed she lived alone in a small apartment across town, claimed she had taken the bag with her for years, claimed she sat in the park simply to enjoy the air. Every claim lined up on the surface, but the container in her possession shattered those assurances. Rowan pressed harder. Her answers grew shorter, and eventually silence replaced words. It wasn't fear that silenced her, it was calculation. She knew more, but she wasn't going to say it. Meanwhile, patrol units swept the area around the park, canvassing for the jogger described earlier. At first there was nothing, but then a store clerk a few blocks down reported something unusual. Minutes after the police scene had drawn attention, a man in athletic gear had entered the shop, ducked quickly into the restroom, and emerged wearing entirely different clothes, leaving behind his cap and jacket stuffed in a trash bin. The items were recovered. Traces of the same thick tar-like grease found on the mall trolley weeks earlier were smeared along the fabric seams. The connection was undeniable. Whoever the jogger was, he had ties to the same network that planted that bag at the mall. The old woman wasn't random. She was part of the same chain. When the preliminary analysis of the vials came back, the findings turned speculation into fear. The liquid inside wasn't narcotics. It wasn't any industrial chemical. It was organic engineered, a viral culture in a dormant state, fragile enough to be destroyed by exposure but potent enough to trigger alarms in bioscanners. It wasn't something someone stumbled upon by accident. It was prepared, preserved, and packaged, a transport container, and the handbag, just a shell to hide it. Grant felt the weight settle deep in his stomach. Rex had caught it instantly. The dog hadn't just sensed contraband, he had detected the faint trace of biological material, which left the question, how many more of these containers existed? And where were they headed? Back at the park, Rex continued to search, his nose tracing faint paths invisible to human eyes. Near the bench where the woman had sat, he suddenly pulled north, toward a grove of trees near the outer fence. There, tucked beneath damp leaves, officers uncovered a second item. A plain paper bag, weighted carefully with stones to keep it from blowing. Inside were disposable gloves, a surgical mask, and a small roll of duct tape. Ordinary objects, but in this context, chilling. It suggested the woman wasn't alone in handling the container. Someone else had prepared her, supplied her, perhaps even guided her every move. The jogger wasn't watching idly. He had been ensuring she followed through, and when the police intervened, he vanished. Detective Rowan pieced together the timeline on his board. Surveillance wiped near the mall weeks earlier. A black sedan tailing the investigation. Now, an elderly woman carrying a container of engineered vials in the park, and a jogger who disappeared into the city shadows. This wasn't coincidence, it was structure. A network moving quietly through ordinary public spaces, hiding dangerous things in plain sight. The woman wasn't the mastermind, she was a courier, chosen precisely because she looked harmless, but chosen by whom? Hours later, the lab made a discovery that shifted everything. On the container's surface, beneath the polished steel, was an engraving so faint it required enhanced light to reveal. Just 3 characters, S19. Rowan froze when he saw it. Years earlier, a task force had shut down a small but notorious underground lab, known only by that same designation. Its specialty had been bioengineering, not for medicine but for profit and leverage. The lab was raided, the leaders arrested, but as Rowan knew too well, networks rarely died, they scattered, and now fragments were resurfacing. Late that night, when the station had quieted, Rex stirred again, still restless, still uneasy. Grant walked him outside to clear his head, but instead of relaxing, Rex froze, nose lifting toward the darkened street beyond headquarters. His muscles tensed, his posture locked. Grant followed his gaze. A lone figure stood half a block away, under the orange haze of a street lamp. Tall, hooded, still, watching. The moment Grant moved, the figure turned and slipped into the shadows. Rex barked once, sharp, deliberate, the same bark he had given at the park. The meaning was clear. This wasn't over. By morning, the woman was transferred into protective custody. The vials were locked under federal containment, and the investigation broadened into a multi-agency pursuit of the network behind it all. For the public, Greenwood Park was just another place cleaned up by routine police work. But for those who stood at the center, the weight of what was uncovered lingered like smoke. Rex remained vigilant, his instincts pulling threads long before humans could see them. Every discovery, the mall trolley, the mysterious woman, the biological vials had formed pieces of a larger puzzle. And though that night ended with more questions than answers, one truth was undeniable. The K9's refusal to leave, his relentless circling, had cracked open something vast, something hidden in plain sight. And while detectives pursued the shadows that remained, Officer Grant knew one thing for certain. If Rex hadn't been there that day, the container might have vanished unnoticed, and what it carried might have reached its destination. Instead, it had been stopped. And that single fact, brought forth by a dog's instincts, left everyone stunned. If you made it this far, you already know. This was just one of many unbelievable moments these K9s uncover every single day. And trust me, the next story is even wilder. So hit that like button, subscribe right now, and don't miss what's coming, because the next twist might just leave you speechless.